Every diver and snorkeler that I know has gone through this. You see the weather, it looks like a bright sunny day, 20-something degrees. It's perfect and glorious. So you pack up your gear, you fill your car, you go down the road and drive 2 hours to get to the best snorkeling beach. And once you hit the water, you can't see your hands. The visibility is terrible and you just have the worst time and end up going back feeling a bit disappointed. Hi, my name is Lou and I'm a certified scuba diver and freediver living in Melbourne, Victoria. And today I actually want to teach you how to choose the best snorkeling and scuba diving sites based on the current weather conditions. To do that, I'll give you a brief intro on how to read the weather conditions for snorkeling and diving, and I'll tell you about 4 places around the greater Melbourne area that you can go to depending on different weather conditions. Let's hop in! The reason why it's so tricky to measure visibility is because there's many variables that impact it. So at the very least, you want to be considering 6 of them: wind speed, wind direction, swell, tides, currents, and recent rainfall. So at the very minimum, if you want to keep it very simple, you most definitely want to be looking at wind direction. What you want is an offshore wind. That means that the wind is blowing from inland to the sea. So if you're on the eastern side of the bay, for example, or the beach that you are is looking out to the east, you want winds that are coming from the east as well. It's pretty simple to remember. Offshore winds keep surface chop low, and it also prevents the seaweeds and algae and sediments to come towards the beach and kind of like murky the water on the dive site. It kind of keeps things moving into the ocean, if you will. The other big thing to look out for is wind speed, as I mentioned. Ideally, you want low winds, low wind speed. So we're looking at something under 15 knots. Anything bigger than that is going to start creating swell, and it's going to be like you're going to be moving quite a bit at the surface. So you don't want that. And again, that kind of like surface chop is going to create murky waters and decrease the visibility. So look for wind speed that is under 15 knots, and essentially the less wind, the better for snorkeling or diving. In addition, and in alignment with that, you want to be looking at low swell. So contrary to surfing, where the bigger swell, the better, you kind of want to be like floating around peacefully when you're snorkeling or diving. So you don't want big waves. So if there's big waves, go surfing. If there's little to no waves, go snorkeling or diving. When it starts getting a bit tricky is when you start talking about tides and currents. And the reason it gets tricky is because they're a bit site dependent. So you can't just with the wind, you're like, all right, wind is coming from the east, I'll just look at all the dive sites on the east side of the bay. But depending on the tide, some sites will require some sort of tides and others are better with different kinds of tides. So that's where like Facebook groups become really, really handy, and just like looking for information about each particular dive site to learn what's the best conditions for that site. Generally speaking, as a general rule of thumb, slack tide or high tide tend to be best, but again, better to check. And the reason this is important is because in some places with strong currents, for example, such as Bellarine Peninsula or Cottage by the Sea, it's dangerous to go in certain tides because the place has very strong currents with either incoming tides or outgoing tides. So places like Bellarine Peninsula and Cottage by the Sea, you most definitely want to ensure that you're there at slack tide and not at any other time, because you might get swept up by the current. Currents are also important if you're a beginner. You most definitely don't want to go to a place that has strong currents unless you're being guided in a drift dive or something like that and being picked up at the other side, because you could be putting yourself in danger. So tides and currents, a bit more tricky, but good to have a look at if you can. And the last element was rainfall. So with rainfall, again, as a general rule of thumb, if it's been raining over the last 2 days, that's going to murky up the water. So if you want to go diving or snorkeling, it's better to wait 1 or 2 days after the most recent rainfall to make sure that you have a better chance of high vis. This is particularly worse for places that are close to river estuaries. So if a river is feeding out into the water and it's close to your dive site, that's going to make rainfall a higher impact variable than if you're out in the open ocean. I hope that doesn't sound too complicated and that your head is just spinning now. Again, if you want to keep things simple, just look at wind first and foremost. but I hope that the other variables are also useful. And again, another thing that is really useful is looking at Facebook groups, asking people what they're seeing, and asking for suggestions where you're not sure to go out. And talking about that, I have a super exciting announcement to make, because a couple of weeks ago, we actually launched a crowdsourced visibility map for Victoria, which means you can now log into our website and check out what the latest visibility reports for the dive sites around the greater Melbourne and Victoria in general area have been over the last week or so, which will help you plan your dives. And the good news is it's open to everybody. So if you go diving, you can log in your dive as well and help other divers plan their dives. So the more the merrier, check it out. I hope it's useful, and please add your own dives. And the other reason why we have created this map is because we're actually working on building a water visibility forecasting model. And every single dive report that comes through this map helps us train that model to get it to be more accurate, so that we can hopefully launch it as an app for you next year, and that can help you plan your dives a bit better. If you want to stay on the loop with the rollout of the app, you can sign into our waitlist on the link below in the description. So do that now. Now, on to the recommendations. First one, if the wind is blowing from the east, you want to be going to the east of the bay. And the best place to go swimming, snorkeling, or scuba diving in the east of the bay could arguably be Ricketts Point. So Ricketts Point Marine Sanctuary is actually the largest marine sanctuary around the greater Melbourne area. And it's great for beginners because it's essentially got beach access, so you can just walk straight into the marine sanctuary. It's got toilets, it's got a cafe, it's got parking, so it's really a kind of like no fuss place to try out snorkeling if you're starting out. And it's not too far from the city, so that also makes it great. At Ricketts Point, you will get to see banjo sharks, you will get to see rays, lots of fish. Sometimes there's Australian salmon around. People have even seen dolphins there. But really, it's quite diverse in terms of marine wildlife, and there's always something new to find out there. So it's a great location. If you want to learn more about Ricketts Point specifically, I do have a different video that goes a bit more in depth into that particular location, but highly recommend when the wind is blowing from the east to check out Ricketts. Now, if the wind is blowing from the north, the place I'd highly recommend you check out is Flinders Pier in the Mornington Peninsula. Flinders Pier is arguably the best place in Victoria to look at weedy sea dragons, which you can't find in many places in the world, so it's quite cool. I do have to say they camouflage really well with the algae around them, so it's one of those where like you might be swimming around in an area for ages and you're like, I can't see anything here, but then once you clock one of them, you'll start seeing them everywhere. It's a bit like finding Wally, I think, or something like that. But because they're very used to divers, they're like, they don't care at all that you're there. So it's really cool because you can get in quite, well, they can get in quite close. So yeah, it's a great place to see weedy sea dragons. And you often also see smooth rays, which are this kind of like giant UFO-like rays that, again, don't care that you're there and just kind of like creep up on you. It's a lovely place to look at those two different marine species. Now, to get to Flinders, you essentially drive down from Melbourne all the way down to the southernmost tip of the Mornington Peninsula, essentially. So you most definitely want a car for this one. It's another very easy dive to get into because it's just the pier. It's got toilets as well. It's got parking as well. So also quite beginner friendly. The only thing I'd say is if you do go towards the end of the pier, like you won't be able to stand up anymore. So that part is better for scuba diving or free diving, or if you're a confident swimmer. But if not, you can still stay closer to the beach. I just advise you to stay under the pier and not go to the sides of it, because there's also people fishing from the top of the pier, so you don't want to get hooked up into a fishing line. Now, if the wind is coming from the south, there's another couple of places in the Mornington Peninsula that are worth you checking out. And namely their Rye Pier or Bellarine Pier. Once again, given that they're both piers, they're both really beginner friendly and really accessible. Rye Pier is actually quite well known for night diving as well, and you get a lot of different critters in the pier. There's a famous local octopus that lives there, and they've actually created a bit of an artificial reef further down the pier where you can see just random objects that were used to create the fake reef. It is quite interesting. And then Bellarine Pier is very well known for its sponge gardens. So all the pylons in the pier are actually just like full of sponges that are very, very colorful. And if you look closely, you'll be able to spot a lot of nudie branches as well. So that's also very exciting. So if you're into macro photography, Bellarine is chef's kiss place to go. And again, both of them very beginner friendly, both of them close to toilets, close to cafes, parking available. So great places to start trying out snorkeling or scuba diving if it's your thing. And last but not least, if the wind is coming from the west, great news, because the west of the bay actually has some great snorkeling and scuba diving dive sites as well. So close to the city, you've got Jawbone Sanctuary and Point Cook Marine Sanctuary. Now, Jawbone Sanctuary is probably the better known of the two. And recently, the Crystal Steps in Williamstown is also getting a bit more hoo-ha and becoming better known. Point Cook Marine Sanctuary is actually very quiet, so if you're into not having people around you, highly recommend. The only thing I'd say with that one is it's a long walk from the parking to the beach, maybe 10 minutes or so. So you do have to carry all your gear and do that walk before you can actually get into the snorkeling side of things. They recently added toilets around the Homestead area, so there are toilets available, but there's no cafes, there's no other kind of facilities, it's quite remote. Both Jawbone and Point Cook have a very similar ecosystem to that of Ricketts, both of them being inside of the bay. So you can see a lot of seagrass meadows, you can see banjo sharks, you can see fiddler rays, and a lot of different kind of fish. So if the wind is blowing from the west and you live in the east, that's not a reason that will keep you from snorkeling or scuba diving. It's not that far away and there's lovely places to check out. If you're living on the west, it's very convenient because it's very close to home and not every single dive site is on the east of the bay. I'd also like to say that the Bellarine Peninsula also has some excellent dive sites. So if you're closer to that side of the bay, you most definitely want to check out Point Lonsdale Pier when wind is coming from the north, or as I mentioned, Cottage by the Sea and Barwon Bluff. Just make sure you've got the right tide to go in, please, and that you're maybe not a beginner because they're a bit more remote than the other ones that I've spoken about. If the wind is coming from the south, you can check out Port Charlington, and if it's coming from the west, you can check out Indented Heads or St. Leonard's Pier as well. Sadly, there's not a lot of places to go when it's coming from the east. You want to be going to the east side of the bay, if that's the case, which there's a ferry, so it's not that far. So that's it for me. Those are the kind of like 4 key locations plus the extra Bellarine Peninsula ones that I suggest you go depending on different weather conditions around the greater Melbourne area. If you have other favorite spots or recommendations, please let us know via the comments below. And if you're keen to check out the crowdsourced visibility map to plan your next dive, also check out the link below and sign up to our waitlist for the rollout of the DiveScout app. Thank you so much. I hope you have a lovely weekend. Happy diving and see you underwater. Bye.